Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Trexler, and in this short video, I'm going to give you a quick look into Bill McKibben's new book, Falter, and how it fits into some of the larger climate change conversation topics that you can investigate in the climate web. Now, it's worth noting to start with that Bill McKibben has done a lot of work on climate change over the last 30 years, and we only have a fraction of that work in the climate web. But as you can see, there's a lot of it, and you can do quite a bit of digging. And I mention this just because the book Falter, sort of coming 30 years after Bill's first book, is a bit out of the ordinary in terms of what he has usually been working on. This is almost more of a philosophical book as to where we are 30 years later and where we're headed, as opposed to a more specific call to action kind of book about climate change, which is what I think a lot of us are used to seeing in a lot of McKibben's work. To quickly just sort of give you a sense of what this book is about, has the human game begun to play itself out? The book falls roughly into four different categories. The first does in fact deal with the climate change emergency and gives a lot of information, a lot of facts. But it doesn't, it then sort of almost leaves climate change behind a little bit and moves into several other phases. An interesting part of the book is its extensive discussion of sort of the work of Ayn Rand and the impact of Ayn Rand's thinking on individualism, on decision makers in the business world, in the financial world, in the political world, that Ayn Rand has had a truly outsized impact on how many powerful people think about what it means to be human and sort of the human condition. And this one quote from one of Ayn Rand's pieces, altruism is the poison of death in the blood of Western civilization, gives you just a sense of where she's coming from on some of these issues and why that philosophy could have a pretty significant impact on how people tend to think about climate change. The third part of the book goes into a totally new area, although an area that Bill McKibben sees as sort of parallel to climate change and its potential impact on the human game. And that's the issue of artificial intelligence. And he reviews where it is, where we are, how fast it's moving, how dramatic the implications could be, and basically concluding that AI could bring the human game to an end, just like climate change can. So, he sets up these three pieces in terms of why we are where we are and where we are in terms of potentially major problems attributable to climate change or to artificial intelligence or to both. And he then does focus somewhat on sort of, there's still an outside chance of success, as he puts the title of a chapter. The resistance to the dangers we face is still at least possible in terms of regulating AI and tackling climate change. And in tackling climate change, he really only focuses on two sort of pieces of the puzzle, solar energy and nonviolent resistance, but focuses quite a bit on his hope for how those could actually move us forward quickly if we wanted to be moved forward quickly. Now, in the climate web, you can access some of the reviews that are out there for Falter and access other material. But let me sort of put into context where I think this book fits. In some ways, this book really is a book about systemic risk. Most conversations about systemic risk are dealing with the financial sector and the risks of climate change to the financial sector, et cetera. What's interesting about this book is that he's sort of taking the whole idea of systemic risk to the next level and pulling in the interactions between climate change, artificial intelligence, and other things to create sort of a systemic super risk, if you will. And that's what I think is most interesting about this particular book. Now, if you're interested in the topic that Bill is writing about here, other things in the climate web that you might want to investigate is the whole conversation about dangerous climate change, and there are massive resources in the climate web to dig into that. There's also the human extinction conversation, which sort of parallels some of what he's talking about, but he doesn't get into that conversation. And more recently, the deep adaptation conversation that is out there that is talking about sort of human social collapse, These are all topics that are very parallel to some of the things in Falter, but they're not specifically discussed in Falter. You might want to look into them in more depth via the Climate Web. And last, you can dig into the whole systemic risk and systemic climate risk conversation that is out there through what's in the Climate Web. For more information on the Climate Web and how you can get into it, take advantage of it, visit the website www.theclimateweb.com. Hope this has been useful. Thanks.